You're enjoying a quiet Sunday morning when your HOA president storms onto your property, screaming that your vegetable garden is destroying property values and threatens to sue you into bankruptcy. But what she doesn't know is that you're not just any homeowner. You're someone who could end her harassment with a single phone call. And when she finally discovers the truth, the look of absolute terror on her face will be burned into your memory forever. This is the story of how Margaret Henderson learned the hard way that you should never judge a book by its cover. 6 months ago, my wife Jennifer and I thought we'd found paradise when we moved to Willowbrook Estates. The houses were beautiful, the streets were clean, and the neighborhood seemed perfect for raising our 8-year-old daughter Emma. Jennifer had just accepted a new position that required us to relocate, and she was excited about the fresh start. What we didn't anticipate was meeting the neighborhood dictator, who would turn our dream home into a battlefield. Jennifer has always been private about her work. She's one of those people who prefers to keep her professional and personal lives completely separate. When neighbors asked what she did for a living, she would simply say she worked for the government and leave it at that. I respected her privacy, even though I sometimes wondered why she was so secretive. Looking back, I realized she probably knew that some people react differently when they learn about her real job. Our first encounter with Margaret Henderson happened on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was outside planting tomatoes in our backyard when this woman appeared at our fence like she'd materialized out of thin air. She was probably in her early 60s, with perfectly styled silver hair and the kind of outfit that screamed, "I need to speak to your manager." Everything about her radiated authority and entitlement. "Excuse me," she called out in a voice that could cut glass. "Are you aware that vegetables gardens are strictly prohibited in Willowbrook Estates?" I looked up from my tomato plants, dirt still clinging to my hands. "I'm sorry, what?" Margaret pulled out her phone and began taking pictures of my modest garden plot. Section 4.7 of the HOA Covenant clearly states that only ornamental landscaping is permitted. Vegetables are considered agricultural use, which violates our residential zoning aesthetic. Couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It's just a few tomato plants and some herbs. Surely that's not a problem." Her eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting prey. "Rules are rules. I'm Margaret Henderson, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, and I take violations very seriously." She handed me a business card that was probably more expensive than my monthly coffee budget. "You have 72 hours to remove these plants, or you'll be facing fines starting at $500. That evening, I told Jennifer about the encounter over dinner. She listened quietly, but I noticed her jaw tighten when I mentioned the fines. "Some people just love having power over others," she said simply. "Don't worry about it, honey. We'll figure something out." Over the next few days, I researched the HOA rules and discovered that Margaret was technically correct about the vegetable garden restriction. It was buried deep in subsection 4.73b, written in language so convoluted that you'd need a law degree to understand it. Frustrated but not wanting to cause trouble, I began removing the plants. That's when Margaret escalated things. On Thursday morning, I found an official notice taped to our front door. Violation citation, failure to comply with landscaping standards. The fine was indeed $500, and it came with a warning that additional penalties would accrue daily, until the violation was corrected. But here's the kicker. I had actually removed the plants the day before. Margaret was fining us even though we'd already complied with her demands. When Jennifer saw the notice, something changed in her demeanor. The calm, easygoing woman I'd married suddenly looked like she was calculating battle strategies. "She's playing games," Jennifer said quietly. "This isn't about garden rules anymore." The harassment intensified over the following weeks. Margaret found violations everywhere she looked. Our mailbox was allegedly 2 inches too far from the curb. Our daughter's bicycle, parked neatly in our driveway, was cited as recreational. Equipment stored in unauthorized locations. Even our welcome mat was deemed non-compliant with approved color schemes. Each violation came with a fine, and each fine was copied to every member of the HOA board. Margaret was clearly building A paper trail, documenting every microscopic infraction like she was preparing for war. The worst part was that she'd patrol past our house multiple times a day, always with her phone ready to photograph any potential violation. Emma started asking why the mean lady was always taking pictures of our house. Jennifer would just smile and tell her not to worry about it, but I could see the stress building in my wife's shoulders. She was taking phone calls at odd hours, speaking in hushed tones about situations and protocols. I assumed it was work-related stress, but now I wonder if she was already planning her counterattack. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in late April. Emma had set up a lemonade stand in our driveway, something she'd been excited about all week. It was her first entrepreneurial venture, complete with hand-drawn signs and a folding table borrowed from our garage. She was so proud, charging 50 cents a cup and donating half the proceeds to the animal shelter. Margaret appeared within 15 minutes of Emma setting up shop. "This is completely unacceptable," she announced, marching up our driveway like a general leading a charge. "Commercial activities are strictly prohibited in residential areas." Emma looked confused and a little scared. "It's just lemonade, lady. I'm only charging 50 cents. Margaret pulled out her phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this. Flagrant violation of HOA commercial use restrictions. This stand must be removed immediately, and you'll be receiving a citation for unauthorized business operations." That's when Jennifer emerged from the house and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. She walked calmly to Emma's side, placing a protective hand on our daughter's shoulder. "Is there a problem here, Ms. Henderson?" Margaret's face lit up with vindictive glee. "Your daughter is operating an illegal business on HOA property. This violates multiple covenants, and the fine will be significant." Jennifer looked down at Emma, who was now close to tears. "Sweetheart, why don't you go inside and help Daddy make lunch? We'll set up your stand again later." After Emma went inside, Jennifer turned back to Margaret with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger exactly, but something colder and more dangerous. "Ms. Henderson, I think we need to have a conversation about your interpretation." "The HOA rules," Margaret smirked. "The rules are very clear. Unlike some people, I actually read them." She waved her phone triumphantly. "This video will be excellent evidence for the hearing. I'm recommending your family be expelled from the association entirely." Jennifer smiled, and it was the kind of smile that should have made Margaret very nervous. "A hearing sounds perfect. I'd love the opportunity to address the entire board." Something in Jennifer's tone made Margaret hesitate for just a moment, but her arrogance quickly returned. "You can address them right before they vote to remove you from the neighborhood. I have connections, Mrs. Williams. I know people who can make your life very difficult." That's when Jennifer said something that should have been Margaret's first warning. "I know people too, Ms. Henderson. The difference is, my people actually have authority." The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Margaret had clearly pulled out all the stops, renting the community center and sending formal notifications to every resident in Willowbrook Estates. The subject line read, "Urgent. Addressing chronic rule violations and disruptive residents." When Thursday arrived, Jennifer spent extra time getting ready. She put on a navy blue pantsuit that I'd never seen before, something that looked expensive and official. When I asked about it, she just said she wanted to look professional for the meeting. She also carried a leather briefcase that seemed oddly heavy for someone planning to defend a lemonade stand. The community center was packed when we arrived. It seemed like half the neighborhood had shown up, drawn by the promise of drama and conflict. Margaret had set up at the front of the room with a full presentation setup, complete with a laptop, projector, and a stack of documents that looked like evidence files. As we found seats near the middle of the room, I noticed several neighbors giving us sympathetic looks. Apparently, Margaret's reign of terror had affected more families than just ours. One elderly man whispered that Margaret had fined him $300 because his rose bushes were excessively fragrant. Another woman mentioned being cited because her dog barked twice during Margaret's daily patrol walks. Margaret called the meeting to order with the authority of someone who genuinely believed she was saving the neighborhood from dangerous criminals. "Thank you all for coming to this emergency session. Tonight, We address the Williams family's continued disregard for community standards and their pattern of disruptive behavior. She clicked to her first slide, a photo of Emma's lemonade stand with dramatic red arrows pointing to various violations. As you can see, the Williams family has been operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise directly violating Section A, 8.2 of our Residential Use Covenant. The presentation continued for 20 minutes, with Margaret displaying photos of every alleged violation from the past month. Our mailbox, Emma's bicycle, even a photo of Jennifer taking out the trash, which Margaret claimed showed improper waste container positioning. It was thorough, vindictive, and completely ridiculous. In conclusion, Margaret announced, I recommend the immediate removal of the Williams family from Willowbrook Estates. They have shown complete disrespect for our community standards and pose a threat to property values neighborhood-wide. The room buzzed with uncomfortable murmurs. Even Margaret's supporters seemed to think she'd gone too far. Then Margaret made her fatal mistake. Before we vote, I'd like to give Mrs. Williams an opportunity to explain her family's antisocial behavior. Jennifer stood up slowly, her briefcase in hand, and walked to the front of the room. Margaret stepped aside with a smug expression, clearly expecting some kind of desperate plea for forgiveness. Instead, Jennifer set her briefcase on the table and opened it with deliberate precision. Thank you, Ms. Henderson. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board. Jennifer's voice carried a new authority that filled the room. Before I respond to your presentation, I think it's important that everyone understands exactly who they're dealing with. She pulled out a leather wallet from her briefcase and flipped it open, displaying something that made the entire front row gasp audibly. Even from the middle of the room, I could see the distinctive gold shield catching the overhead lights. My name is Jennifer Williams, and I'm a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, currently assigned to the Financial Crimes Division. The room went dead silent. Margaret's face cycled through several colors before settling on a sickly shade of pale green. Jennifer continued, her voice calm and professional. For the past 6 weeks, I've been documenting Ms. Henderson's harassment campaign against my family. What started as a simple dispute about tomato plants has escalated into systematic intimidation, extortion through fraudulent fines, and targeted harassment of a minor child. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the table. This contains copies of every citation, every fine notice, and every threatening communication we've received. It also contains surveillance footage from our home security system, showing Ms. Henderson trespassing on our property multiple times to photograph alleged violations. Margaret found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. That's not. I was enforcing community standards. Jennifer smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made suspects confess immediately. Ms. Henderson, extortion is a federal crime. Using your position as HOA president to systematically harass a family constitutes abuse of authority, and threatening to have someone removed from their home based on fabricated violations? That's approaching racketeering territory. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Margaret looked like she was about to collapse, gripping the edge of the table for support. I didn't know, she stammered. I was just... The rules. Jennifer opened her folder and began reading aloud. Quote, I have connections, Mrs. Williams. I know people who can make your life very difficult. End quote. That was recorded during your confrontation with my 8-year-old daughter over a lemonade stand. Would you like me to play the audio file for everyone? One of the HOA board members, a nervous-looking man in his 50s, raised his hand tentatively. Agent Williams, what does this mean for the association? Jennifer turned to address him directly. Well, Mr. Patterson, that depends on how the board chooses to handle this situation moving forward. The FBI takes allegations of organized harassment very seriously, especially when they involve abuse of quasi-governmental authority. She pulled out another document from her briefcase. I've prepared a comprehensive report detailing Ms. Henderson's pattern of behavior. This report will be submitted to the appropriate authorities, along with a recommendation for how to proceed. Margaret, finally seemed to understand the gravity of her situation. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean any harm. I was just trying to maintain standards." Jennifer looked at her with something that might have been pity. "Ms. Henderson, you threatened to destroy my family over tomato plants. You harassed my child over a lemonade stand. You've turned this neighborhood into your personal fiefdom, using fear and intimidation to control everyone around you." She closed her briefcase with a definitive snap. "However, I'm not unreasonable. I'm willing to consider this a learning experience, rather than a federal case under certain conditions." The room held its breath waiting for Jennifer's terms. First, Ms. Henderson will immediately resign from her position as HOA president and from the board entirely. Second, all fines and citations issued to my family and any other residents in the past year will be reviewed and reversed where appropriate. Third, the HOA will implement new oversight procedures to prevent this kind of abuse from happening again. Margaret nodded frantically, probably agreeing to anything that would keep her out of federal prison. "Yes, absolutely. Whatever you think is appropriate," Jennifer smiled. And for the first time that evening, it looked genuinely warm. "I'm glad we could reach an understanding. Oh, and Ms. Henderson, my daughter will be setting up her lemonade stand again this Saturday. I trust there won't be any further issues with that." The meeting ended with a unanimous vote to accept Margaret's resignation and implement Jennifer's recommended reforms. As people filed out, many stopped to apologize for not speaking up sooner, and to thank Jennifer for finally standing up to the neighborhood tyrant. Margaret slipped out the back exit, her head down and her tail between her legs. We later heard that she moved out of Willowbrook Estates within a month, relocating to a condo complex where she presumably terrorizes a whole new set of neighbors. Emma's lemonade stand the following Saturday was the most successful in neighborhood history. She raised over $200 for the animal shelter, with neighbors lining up to buy cups of lemonade and show their support. Several people joked that it was the best-tasting victory they'd ever experienced. The new HOA president, Mr. Patterson, turned out to be reasonable and fair. The first thing he did was revise the covenant rules, removing the most ridiculous restrictions and implementing an appeals process for violations. Our tomato plants were not only permitted but praised as an excellent addition to the neighborhood's landscape diversity. Jennifer never did tell me why she'd kept her job secret for so long. When I asked, she just smiled and said that some people treat you differently when they know you carry a badge and a gun. She preferred to be judged on her character rather than her profession. Though after watching Margaret's spectacular downfall, I had to admit there was something satisfying about the dramatic reveal. Looking back, I realized that Margaret's biggest mistake wasn't targeting the wrong family. It was assuming that power comes from fear and intimidation, rather than respect and fairness. She thought her HOA president title made her untouchable, but real authority comes from serving others, not controlling them. The neighborhood is peaceful now, the way it should be. Emma sells lemonade every Saturday, raising money for different charities and bringing the community together. Our tomato plants are thriving, and we share the harvest with neighbors who've become genuine friends. And somewhere in another city, Margaret Henderson is probably measuring someone's grass with a ruler, completely oblivious to the fact that she might be messing with the wrong person again. The moral of this story is simple. You never know who you're dealing with, so treat everyone with respect. That quiet neighbor might be a federal agent. The friendly guy walking his dog might be a federal judge. The woman reading a book at the park might be a prosecutor who could make your life very complicated. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA president or neighborhood Karen? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and some of them are absolutely wild. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more satisfying karma stories. Ring the notification bell because, trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when entitled people discover they've picked the wrong target. And remember, document everything. In Jennifer's case, having evidence of Margaret's harassment was crucial to resolving the situation. Whether it's screenshots, recordings, or security footage, Documentation is your best defense against bullies who think they're above consequences.